You think the worst day of your life is the day your husband dies, until you find out it was just the opening act of a performance designed to destroy you. I believed I knew grief. The hollow ache of 4 failed IVF treatments had taught me its rhythm, its weight. But nothing prepared me for the Tuesday morning when Dylan kissed me goodbye, complained of a headache, and never came home again. "Stay home today," I'd urged, running my fingers through his dark hair as he winced at the kitchen light. "Whatever meeting you have can wait." Dylan smiled that half smile I'd fallen for 11 years earlier. "Can't, Claire Bear. Carlson mergers today. I'll call you after. Promise." I watched him adjust his tie in our hallway mirror, the one we'd salvaged during our Victorians renovation. We'd bought the house for $850,000, a stretch for us then. Dylan had insisted we could make it work. "This is where we'll grow old together," he'd said, tracing the original crown molding with reverent fingers. Now I traced the same crown molding alone, wondering if he somehow knew. If some part of him sensed our time was shorter than we'd planned. The hospital called at 2:14 that afternoon. Dylan had collapsed during his presentation. By the time I arrived, white-knuckled and breathless, he was already gone. Ruptured cerebral aneurysm, they said. No warning, no chance, no goodbye. I moved through the funeral like a sleepwalker, shook hands, accepted condolences, gave a eulogy that people later called brave and moving. I remember none of it, just the weight of the urn in my hands afterward, impossibly light for all it contained. For 3 months after, I barely left our house. My interior design clients were understanding. Death grants temporary exemptions from obligations. My mother called daily, her voice pitched high with that dramatic concern that had always set my teeth on edge. "Claire, honey, you need to eat. You need to see people. Dylan wouldn't want this." Dylan wouldn't want a lot of things, like being dead at 36. My sister Jules sent exactly one text. "Hope you're okay. Max misses you." Max, my nephew. 1 year old and the spitting image of Jules. Wild curls and wide eyes. I'd been there for his birth, held him while Jules slept. And now I couldn't bear to look at him. Couldn't stomach the reminder of the family Dylan and I never had. 4 rounds of IVF, each one more devastating than the last, until 2 years ago, when we decided enough was enough. "We are still a family," Dylan had insisted, holding me as I sobbed. "Just us two. Just me now." The birthday invitation arrived on a Thursday. Cheerful cartoon animals dancing across heavy cardstock. "One," spelled out in bright blue letters. My first instinct was to toss it, but something stopped me. I called my mother to decline. "I can't, Mom, not yet." "Dylan would have wanted you to be there," she said, a statement both manipulative and true. "Family matters, Claire. Family matters." The words echoed as I drove to Jules's rental house in South Haven the following Saturday. I noticed the overgrown lawn, the cheap blue balloons tied to the mailbox. Tina, Jules's best friend since college, opened the door with an awkward smile. "Didn't think you'd make it," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder. Inside, the air felt wrong. My parents hugged me too tightly, my father's eyes refusing to meet mine. Neighbors and friends offered shallow condolences, asked careful questions that skirted the enormity of my loss. I smiled and nodded, searching the room for my nephew. That's when Jules emerged from the kitchen, wearing a new dress I didn't recognize, her hair freshly dyed. Something about her posture, a confidence that felt performative, made my stomach turn. "Everyone gather outside," she called, voice musical. Time for cake. The backyard was cramped, folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. Jules stood at the center, plastic wineglass in hand, and clinked it with a fork until the chatter died. "This year has been complicated," she began, her tone rehearsed. "Full of joy and sorrow. As you all know, we lost my brother-in-law Dylan 3 months ago. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. My fingers tightened around my own glass. But before that terrible day, something beautiful happened. Jules continued, her eyes finding mine. Something I've kept private until now, out of respect. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Max is not Cameron's son, she announced. He's Dylan's. The yard went silent, then gasps. My hands turned to ice. It was a mistake, Jules said, eyes downcast in practiced remorse. A moment of weakness. But Dylan knew. He wanted to provide for his son. From her purse, she produced a folded document. He updated his will to leave half their house to Max, his son, his legacy. Every face turned toward me, shocked, confused, judgmental. My parents looked pale and ill. My mother swayed slightly, gripping my father's arm. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I studied the room, then fixed my gaze on Jules. May I see that? I asked, my voice steady. Jules's eyes gleamed as she handed over the paper. Her fingers were steady, confident. I scanned the document silently. The formatting was wrong, the terminology awkward, and the signature, close, but not quite Dylan's familiar scrawl. I knew immediately it was a forgery, but my face revealed nothing. I handed it back with a small smile. Thank you, Jules. I think I'll be going now. I left without another word, feeling the weight of stairs on my back. In the safety of my car, I finally released the sound building in my chest. Not a sob, but a cold, sharp laugh. Because I knew something Jules didn't, and it was about to dismantle every lie she'd just told. Lies don't just fall from the sky. They're grown, slowly, strategically, and always at the expense of truth. As I drove home from Jules' house, memories flooded back, not in waves, but in razor-sharp fragments. The pieces I'd missed, the warnings I'd ignored. I met Dylan 12 years ago at a fundraising gala for pediatric cancer. I was 34, recently promoted at my design firm, volunteering to organize the silent auction. He was a junior attorney, new to Portland, slightly out of place among the old money crowd. I noticed him bidding on a watercolor of the Boston skyline, my favorite piece. When it sold, I felt a twinge of disappointment. Later, as I was packing up, he approached with the painting in hand. I think this belongs with you, he said, extending it toward me. I saw you looking at it earlier. You outbid everyone, I replied, confused. His smile was unassuming, genuine. I can appreciate art, but you looked like you were homesick for it. I was. Boston was my hometown. I'd left 5 years earlier, but still ached for it sometimes. We had dinner the next night. He remembered our server's name, asked thoughtful questions, listened more than he spoke. When he kissed me goodnight outside my apartment, I knew this was different. 8 months later, he proposed on the pier during a weekend trip to Seattle. A year after that, we found our Victorian in Maple Heights, a neglected beauty with good bones and terrible plumbing. We spent weekends tearing out carpet, refinishing hardwood, arguing about paint colors, and falling deeper in love with the house and each other. Children were always part of our plan. We started trying right away, confident in our bodies, our future. Nothing happened. Tests followed, treatments, hormone injections that left me bloated and emotional, appointments that turned our calendar into a clinical roadmap. 4 rounds of IVF, each one more physically and emotionally brutal than the last. I still remember the final failed round, the drive home from the clinic, the silence thick between us. That night, Dylan held me on our back porch swing and whispered, "You and me, that's enough." It was always enough. We redefined our lives together, traveled more, expanded my boutique interior design firm, planted a garden. Life wasn't lesser, just different than we'd imagined. And through it all, there was Jules. My sister is 4 years younger, always the wild one of the family. Pretty in that effortless way that turns heads. Smart, but restless. A constant series of short-lived jobs, volatile relationships, and crises that somehow always became someone else's problem to solve. Usually mine. Our parents enabled her behavior from childhood, made excuses, shielded her from consequences. She's sensitive, my mother would say. She feels things more deeply. Jules never congratulated me without finding a way to redirect attention back to herself. When I launched my company, her response was, "So when are you finally giving me a job?" When I showed her our new house, she asked, "How much did Daddy help with the down payment?" He hadn't. But it was Dylan who truly brought out something dark in her. From the moment I introduced them, something shifted in Jules' orbit. Suddenly, she was dating a law student. After our wedding, she started dropping comments, seemingly innocent but laced with something possessive. "You got lucky, Claire. A guy like that doesn't come around twice. Don't forget what you've got." 3 years ago, we hosted a family dinner to celebrate Jules's new job at a marketing firm. I stepped away to take a client call, and when I returned, Jules was sitting too close to Dylan, her hand on his forearm, leaning in with that laugh she reserves for men she's targeting. Dylan's face was a mask of discomfort. That night, after everyone left, he told me everything. "She made comments about how I deserve better," he said, his voice tight. "She suggested you were too focused on work to appreciate me." "What did you say?" I asked, stunned. "I told her she was out of line." She brushed it off, said I was misinterpreting. He rubbed his forehead. "Claire, this isn't the first time." My stomach dropped as he detailed other incidents I'd missed, late-night texts that were accidental or overly familiar, the way she'd touch his arm or shoulder when I wasn't looking. Once, she'd even appeared at his law firm, claiming she was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off cookies for his team. Dylan had told me everything, every time. We consulted Harold Gaines, our family attorney and Dylan's mentor, about how to handle it. Together, we decided on distance. We'd stop attending events if Jules was there. Dylan blocked her number. I told my mother about Jules's behavior, but she brushed it off as Jules being dramatic. Then came the surgery that changed everything. 2 years before Max was born, Dylan experienced testicular pain. The diagnosis, varicocele, requiring surgery. His doctor recommended a vasectomy at the same time, for long-term health reasons. It was a difficult decision, given our years of trying for a family, but we made it together. The procedure was successful. The follow-up tests confirmed what we expected. Dylan was sterile. Only the three of us knew. Dylan, me, and Harold, who helped us update our wills and medical directives. "The chapter's over," Dylan joked afterward, "but the sequel's going to need a lawyer." I thought he was exaggerating. 6 months later, Jules announced her pregnancy at Thanksgiving dinner. She cried at the table, calling it a miracle since she and her boyfriend Cameron had only been together a few months. Everyone clapped, even though she wasn't married and had no stable income. I stabbed my fork into my mashed potatoes and forced a smile. Dylan's reaction was quiet, unreadable. After dinner, as we drove home, he finally spoke. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said. I thought he meant the timing. Jules getting pregnant so soon after our final decision to stop trying. I didn't understand the deeper implication until much later. One night, about a month before Max was born, I found Dylan in his home office, assembling a file. When I asked what he was working on, he hesitated before answering. "Disaster protocol. If Jules goes nuclear." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, one of his law firm's hypothetical training scenarios. He didn't laugh with me. "She's been acting strange," he said, making comments about family obligations, financial responsibilities. I just want to be prepared. For what? I asked. He closed the file. Hopefully nothing. I should have pressed harder. Should have seen what he already knew. That Jules was setting a stage, arranging props, preparing for a performance that would only begin after he couldn't defend himself. After Max was born, Jules became oddly protective of him around Dylan. Would move away if Dylan tried to hold him, made excuses about the baby being fussy or needing to nurse whenever we visited. Dylan noticed. He documented everything in that file of his, added medical records, made copies, arranged for Harold to notarize documents I didn't fully understand the purpose of at the time. Love writes memories, Dylan told me once, his voice quiet as we sat on our porch swing. But betrayal? It writes contingency plans. I didn't understand then what he meant. I thought he was being paranoid, overly cautious from years of legal training. I teased him about it gently. Now, as I pulled into our driveway, my driveway, I finally understood. Dylan had seen Jules clearly, had anticipated what she might do, had prepared for it. And somewhere in this house was the ammunition I needed to fight back. Love writes memories, but betrayal? It writes contingency plans. I walked into our house, my house, with purpose. My grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else. Cold determination. Jules had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed my devastation would make me passive, malleable. She'd forgotten I was the one who'd built a business from scratch while she bounced from job to job. I went straight to my home office and pulled out the old brass key Dylan had given me years ago. Our insurance policy in case the world goes to hell, he'd called it, half joking. I never imagined the hell would come from my own sister. The next morning, I visited Portland Trust and Federal. The bank manager, Mr. Winters, recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, offering a gentle handshake. "I was so sorry to hear about Dylan. He was a good man." "Yes," I replied simply. "He was." Mr. Winters escorted me to the private viewing room where safety deposit boxes were accessed. I inserted my key, and he used the bank's master. The metal drawer slid out with a smooth mechanical sound. Inside was a blue legal folder labeled Mitchell Contingency, Jules. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted it out. I waited until Mr. Winters left before opening it. The contents were meticulously organized, as only Dylan would arrange them. First, a notarized, professionally drawn-up will, leaving 100% of our assets to me. The document bore the letterhead of Harold's law firm and had been filed with the county registrar 3 months before Dylan's death. Next, certified medical documents confirming Dylan's vasectomy, performed 25 months before Max's birth, along with subsequent tests confirming sterility. A handwritten journal contained dates, incidents, and direct quotes from Jules. Dylan had documented everything: her inappropriate comments, her attempts to get him alone, the way she'd tried to create friction between us. There were printouts of text messages Jules had sent Dylan, ranging from flirty to bitterly accusatory when he didn't respond. And finally, a sealed envelope with my name on it. For Claire. Only if she ever turns on you. I took a deep breath and broke the seal. Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Jules has made good on her threats. I always hoped she wouldn't. That family ties would be stronger than whatever is broken inside her. But I couldn't take that chance. Not with you. If she uses my death to hurt you, I want you to be ready. The documents in this file will protect you legally. Harold knows everything. Trust him. You don't need to forgive. You only need to survive, with your dignity intact. I couldn't stop her in life without destroying your family, but in death, I can protect you. I love you more than anything. Remember that. Dylan. I clutched the letter to my chest, grief mingling with a new emotion. Resolve. Dylan hadn't just loved me, he'd anticipated every move Jules might make, even from beyond the grave. I copied everything before returning the originals to the safety deposit box. Then I called Harold Gaines. Harold's office felt like Dylan, warm, scholarly, lined with law books. Harold himself was in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen decades of human drama unfold through legal documents. I laid out everything from the safe. Harold reviewed the forged will Jules had presented at the party. "This is amateur work," he said, shaking his head. "Incorrect legal phrasing, improper witness formatting, and the signature." He squinted. "Close, but not Dylan's. This wouldn't last 5 minutes in probate." "What are my options?" I asked. Harold leaned back in his chair. "We could press criminal charges, forgery, fraud, attempted theft, or we could corner Jules into a full retraction." He drummed his fingers on the desk. "But before we move, we need to understand her endgame. Fraud this bold has deeper motives." That's when Harold brought in Frank Malloy, a retired detective who now worked private cases. Frank was mid-50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a Boston accent that reminded me of home. "Tell me everything," Frank said after introductions. I explained the full situation, the timeline, family dynamics, Jules's history of manipulating others. Frank asked pointed questions. "Does she have money problems? Who's the child's real father? Do you think she had help forging the will?" I realized how little I knew about Jules's life the past year. We'd grown more distant after Max was born, partly because of her behavior toward Dylan, partly because watching her with a baby reopened wounds I'd tried to heal. "I'll find out," Frank promised. "By Friday, I'll know what toothpaste she uses." I gave him access to shared family cloud accounts, email histories, and old messages. Then I went home to prepare my own defenses. I printed multiple copies of all documents: the real will, medical records, Dylan's journal. I bought a new safe and installed it in the basement. On advice from my therapist, Dr. Laurel Chen, I began documenting my emotional responses to everything happening. "You're experiencing complex grief," Dr. Chen explained during our emergency session. "Betrayal by family while mourning compounds trauma. Write it down. All of it." "I feel so angry," I admitted. "Is that normal?" "Completely," she said firmly. "You don't owe forgiveness to someone who forged your dead husband's signature. Not now. Maybe not ever." She encouraged me to think strategically, not just reactively. "Claire, you built a business by anticipating client needs before they knew them themselves. Use those same skills now." That night, I reviewed Dylan's journal more carefully. An entry labeled "Last Straw, October 3rd" caught my attention. Dylan described an incident where Jules had attempted to kiss him at his office. He'd pushed her away immediately. He wrote that he'd planned to tell my parents but changed his mind. I checked his old desktop computer and found a draft email to my father with the subject, "Juliana," a line crossed. He never sent it. I sat at his desk, imagining him there, conflicted, protective, afraid of the family fallout. I'd never realized how alone he must have felt, carrying the weight of Jules' inappropriate behavior while trying to shield me from it. 3 days later, Frank called. "Claire," he said, his voice grave. "We need to meet in person. What I've found changes everything." We met at Harold's office the next morning. Frank laid out a thick folder on the conference table. "Your sister is drowning in debt," he began without preamble. "Over $78,000. 5 maxed-out credit cards, 2 personal loans, 1 payday loan with criminal interest rates. She's 4 months behind on rent. There's an eviction notice on her door." I stared at the financial statements in shock. She never said a word. Not even once. "There's more," Frank continued. "Max has a congenital heart condition. He had surgery at 3 months old. The hospital bill was $42,000, and her insurance denied partial coverage. Suddenly, Jules' increasingly desperate behavior made terrible sense. That's when she started acting strange, I murmured. More withdrawn, more desperate. Frank nodded. She was drowning. Your house was her lifeboat. He placed a printout of text messages in front of me. These are deleted texts between Jules and her friend Tina, recovered via Tina's ex, who's a tech consultant. Read them. I know it's wrong, but this is my shot. Dave is photoshopping the signature. He copied it from the charity auction site. Claire won't fight. She's grieving. I'll push just hard enough. Even if it doesn't work, I bet she'll settle. She always caves. My hands shook with anger. The betrayal wasn't just impulsive. It was calculated, premeditated cruelty. What about Cameron? I asked. Max's real father? Frank's expression hardened. Cameron Woods has 2 restraining orders from previous girlfriends, unpaid child support for another kid in Nevada. Last seen leaving Oregon for Seattle with his new girlfriend 6 months ago. I understood now. So Jules needed a father for Max. Dead or alive. One more thing, Frank said, opening another file. Jules didn't announce her pregnancy until 8 weeks after Dylan's vasectomy. The timeline doesn't add up. Conception would have been impossible. I stared at the calendar Frank had assembled. She wasn't even pregnant when she announced it at Thanksgiving, was she? She needed to create the illusion of a father early enough to build a narrative. Frank nodded grimly. I returned home that evening and reread Dylan's journal entry from the night of that Thanksgiving. She's rewriting my life without my consent. I stared at the painting Dylan bought me the night we met, the Boston skyline watercolor that started everything. I'd let Jules near him for too long. I wouldn't make that mistake again. It was time to confront her. On my terms. In my home. I called Jules the next morning. Let's talk, I said. Tomorrow. Just you and me. Her response dripped with smug satisfaction. Finally. I knew you'd come around. I spent the day preparing. I cleaned the house, organized my documents, and set the stage like a negotiation. I deliberately dressed in plain, somber clothes. Nothing that could be interpreted as weakness or surrender. I sat in Dylan's old armchair and waited. The doorbell rang precisely at 10. I opened the door to find Jules standing there, smiling, holding a bottle of wine. Let's make this civil, shall we? She said, stepping past me into the house. She had no idea what was coming. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in a room you control, one paper at a time. I let Jules walk past me into the house we'd once shared Sunday dinners in, the house she'd tried to steal with a forged signature. She looked around appreciatively, as if already measuring for new curtains. Wine? She offered, holding up the bottle. It's 10 in the morning. Jules? She shrugged. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. I'd arranged the living room carefully, 2 armchairs facing each other, a coffee table between them with a visible audio recorder, a glass of water, and a folder marked Mitchell Estate. Have a seat, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. As she sat, I turned on the recorder. I'm recording this, for both our protection. Do you agree? Jules hesitated, then nodded. Sure. Whatever makes you comfortable. Tell me about you and Dylan, I said, my voice neutral. Jules launched into her story without hesitation, describing their supposed affair with practiced lines that sounded rehearsed. We met at the downtown Marriott, she said. Dylan felt neglected. He said you were always working, always focused on your clients instead of him. Which Marriott? I asked. Downtown has 3. She faltered briefly. The one near Pioneer Square. What did he order from room service? We didn't usually eat. Did he sleep on the left or right side of the bed? Her eyes narrowed. What kind of question is that? One a wife would know the answer to, I replied evenly. As she continued, her story frayed at the edges. Dates didn't align. Details contradicted each other. I let her talk until she'd thoroughly tangled herself in her own web. "You're lying," I finally said. "And I can prove it." I opened the folder and laid out the documents one by one. Medical records confirming Dylan's vasectomy 2 years before Max's birth. Test results confirming his sterility months before Jules claimed their affair began. Dylan's real will, notarized and court-filed. The timeline showing Jules' pregnancy announcement came after Dylan's procedure. Finally, the text logs from Tina. "Dave's almost done faking the signature. She'll break when she sees it." Jules stared at the papers, her face draining of color. For a moment, genuine fear flashed across her features. She started, then stopped. Her shoulders slumped. The performance was over. I didn't know what else to do. She whispered, tears forming. "I'm broke. I'm losing my home. Cameron's gone. Max needs surgery again." I watched her coldly. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry I found out." She didn't deny it. "Here's what happens now," I said, sliding a document across the table. "These are my terms." She scanned the agreement Harold had prepared. Jules would publicly confess. No affair, no paternity. Will was fake. I would set up a trust fund for Max's medical and educational needs. I would gain joint guardianship over Max. Jules couldn't move out of state or make major decisions without my approval. Jules would attend weekly therapy, financial counseling, and maintain full-time employment. Any violation of these terms, and I would press criminal charges. "This is blackmail," Jules whispered. "This is mercy," I corrected. "You tried to destroy Dylan's name. You tried to steal my life. This is the only reason you're not in a cell right now." She attempted to negotiate softer terms, but I remained firm. Eventually, she signed. "We will meet with my attorney and our parents on Saturday," I told her. "You will read this confession word for word. Do you understand me?" She nodded. There was no fight left in her. Saturday night arrived. I hosted a formal dinner with Jules, our parents, and Harold Gaines. After the main course, Jules read her signed confession out loud. My parents were stunned. My mother started crying. My father sat in silence, his face ashen with shame. I watched my mother try to console Jules and finally spoke up. "I buried my husband. Then I had to bury the truth he protected me from. That sympathy, it belongs to Max, not to her." My mother looked at me pleadingly. "She's your sister, Claire." "And I was your daughter," I replied sharply. "The one who didn't lie, didn't steal, didn't fake a will." Where was that same concern for me? My father reached across the table for my hand. "Dylan warned me," he admitted quietly. "I told him to drop it. I didn't want to believe Jules was capable." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong." I thanked him for his honesty but made it clear. Trust from me will take time, if it returns at all. That night, after everyone left, I stepped into the guest room where Max was sleeping. Jules had brought him over for the evening, unable to find a sitter. I watched his small chest rise and fall, his face peaceful in sleep. "I will make sure she never uses you like that again," I whispered. Then I turned and locked the door behind me, not of the nursery, but of my past. 1 year later, I stood in the garden Dylan had planted before his death. Daffodils pushed through the soil, their bright yellow faces turning toward the spring sun. Their roots were laid the fall before Dylan died. Symbolic, quiet, resilient. He didn't know he was planting them for me to survive, I thought. But maybe he did. Max was now 2. Happy, safe, playful. The trust fund covered his heart treatments and a future college plan. I saw him weekly. Zoo trips, library visits, art projects at my house. The joint guardianship gave me legal authority to ensure Jules couldn't make decisions that would harm him. Jules herself remained under strict compliance with our agreement. She kept a steady job as an office manager at a pediatric dental clinic, attended therapy and financial counseling. She hadn't attempted contact outside our agreed legal channels. I maintained strict boundaries, civil but distant communication, just enough to ensure Max's well-being. With Harold's help, I launched the Dylan Mitchell Legal Fellowship, providing scholarships to law students from underserved backgrounds. Dylan's former colleagues donated annually. At the first fundraising event, I gave a speech. Dylan believed the law should shield, not shame, and he believed the truth. Once buried must be unearthed. I continued therapy with Dr. Chen. I still wore my wedding ring, but on a chain now, not my finger. I joined a grief support group and formed deep friendships with other widows. 6 months ago, I met Michael Graves, an ethics professor at Portland State. Gentle, steady, with a quiet strength that reminded me of Dylan without trying to replace him. He knew about Dylan, about Jules, about everything. He wasn't threatened by memory. Last week, my father visited. He brought an old family photo, Jules and me as children, arms around each other, gap-toothed smiles wide. "I'm sorry," he said again. Not just for not believing, but for enabling her for decades. I forgave him, not fully, but enough. "You can't change the past," I told him, "but you can stop pretending it didn't happen." That evening, I wrote a letter to Max and sealed it in an envelope labeled, "When you're ready to know." Inside was the truth about Jules, about Dylan, and my promise. "You were always loved, but you were almost used as a weapon. I made sure that never happened." As dusk fell, I watered the garden one last time. The flowers Dylan planted continued to bloom year after year, oblivious to the human drama that had unfolded around them. Justice doesn't always come in the form of punishment. Sometimes it comes in the form of protection. Dylan didn't die in vain. He died prepared. And I didn't break. I became the woman he always believed I was. She came for my grief. I gave her my silence, and that was louder than anything she could scream. Some revenge stories end with screams. The best ones end with silence and control. 5 years have passed since that confrontation in my living room. The daffodils Dylan planted have multiplied, spreading across our garden in bright yellow clusters. I still think of them as messengers from him, resilient, returning year after year despite everything. Max is now 6, starting first grade this fall. The heart condition that nearly bankrupted Jules has stabilized with proper medical care. The trust fund I established ensures he'll never go without treatment, and someday, he'll have money for college. I see him every weekend, museum trips, science experiments in the kitchen, and baseball games where he cheers too loudly for the wrong team. "Aunt Claire," he asked last month while we were planting tomatoes, "why don't you and Mom talk much?" I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about each other. Like when Tommy and I fought over the blue crayon. I smiled. Something like that. "But I'll always be here for you." And I am. Joint guardianship has given me the legal authority to protect him. Jules cannot move him out of state or make major decisions without my approval. It's not traditional, but it works. Jules has kept her end of our agreement. She's worked at the same pediatric dental clinic for 4 years now, steadily promoted to office manager. Her financial counseling has helped her climb out of debt. The weekly therapy continues, though I don't ask about it. Our interactions are civil, brief, focused entirely on Max. My parents have found their own version of peace. My father visits regularly, helping with home repairs Dylan would have handled. My mother tries too hard, bringing casseroles, suggesting setups with eligible men, but I recognize it as her attempt to rebuild what was broken. The Dylan Mitchell Legal Fellowship now supports 5 students annually. At last year's fundraiser, one of the recipients, a young woman from South Portland, told me she'd chosen law school after watching her immigrant parents struggle with predatory landlords. Mr. Mitchell would have been proud, Harold told me afterward. Yes, I said simply. He would. I still wear Dylan's ring on a chain around my neck, not as a memorial, but as a reminder. Love doesn't die, it transforms. My relationship with Michael has deepened into something steady and true. He proposed last month, not trying to replace what I had with Dylan, but offering something new beside it. I'm not asking you to forget, he said, holding out the simple emerald ring. I'm asking if there's room for more. There is. I said yes. Last week, I added a final document to Max's future letter, a photograph of Dylan and me at the charity auction where we met. On the back, I wrote, "Your Uncle Dylan saw the truth in people. He would have loved watching you grow up. Someday, when Max is old enough to understand, he'll learn about the forgery, about Jules's desperation, about the house she tried to steal. But he'll also learn about the uncle who protected me even after death, and the aunt who ensured he was safe, educated, and loved. Justice comes in different forms. For some, it's punishment. For others, revenge. But the truest justice I found was in protection, both of Dylan's legacy and of Max's future. Yesterday, I scattered some of Dylan's ashes in our garden, among the flowers he planted. Michael stood respectfully at a distance, understanding this moment wasn't about him. As I knelt in the soil, I whispered my final goodbye. "She came for your name," I said softly, "but I kept it safe." The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the garden. I'd like to think it was Dylan's way of answering. I am not the woman I was 5 years ago when I opened the door to find Jules standing there with a bottle of wine and lies on her lips. Grief shattered me, then rebuilt me stronger. Betrayal taught me to protect what matters most. In the end, Jules didn't win my house or my money. Instead, she lost the one thing she never valued enough: trust. And I gained something unexpected: a chance to ensure that Max grows up loved, secure, and free from manipulation. Some might say forgiveness is the final step of healing. Perhaps someday I'll reach that point with Jules, but for now, my peace comes from boundaries, clear, firm, and unbreakable. She came for my grief. I gave her my silence, and that was louder than anything she could scream. 10 years to the day after Dylan's death, I stood in our garden, now bursting with color in the late spring sunshine. The Victorian house behind me had weathered another decade, its bones still strong despite the passing years. Max, now 11, kneeled beside me, carefully placing stones around a new planting bed. "You're sure he would have liked this?" he asked, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I'm certain," I replied, watching him arrange the river rocks in a perfect circle. "Your Uncle Dylan believed gardens were about patience, planting something you might not see bloom for years." Max nodded solemnly. He'd grown into a thoughtful boy with a quiet intelligence that sometimes caught me off guard. Last year, when he turned 10, I'd given him the letter I'd written all those years ago. Not the full story. He was still too young for that. But enough to understand his connection to Dylan wasn't biological, but was still meaningful. He left money for my surgeries even though I wasn't his son, Max had said afterward, his brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because Dylan believed family isn't always about blood," I'd answered. "Sometimes it's about choice." The surgeries were behind us now. Max's heart condition had stabilized after the final procedure 3 years ago. He played soccer, built intricate Lego cities, and devoured books about space exploration. The trust fund that had once been a lifeline for his medical needs was now growing steadily for his education. Jules arrived to pick him up at 4, right on schedule. Our interactions remained cordial but distant. She'd rebuilt her life in many ways, stayed at the same job, maintained a modest apartment, even completed a dental hygienist certification program last year. Our legal arrangement had evolved as Max grew older, but I remained a constant in his life. He has a science project due Tuesday, she reminded me, hovering at the garden gate. We finished it yesterday, I replied. The solar system model is in his backpack. She nodded, then hesitated. Claire, thank you. It was the closest thing to genuine gratitude I'd heard from her in a decade. I acknowledged it with a small nod as Max hugged me goodbye. After they left, Michael joined me in the garden, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. We'd been married for 4 years now. He'd moved into the Victorian with the understanding that it would always carry Dylan's memory in its walls. "How is the Memorial Garden project?" he asked, handing me a glass. "Good," I said. "Max has Dylan's eye for detail." Michael smiled. "Family traits come in unexpected ways." That evening, I received a text from Harold Gaines. Now semi-retired at 75, he still checked in regularly. His message was simple. 10 years. Dylan would be proud of everything you've built. I texted back. He laid the foundation. Later, as twilight settled over the garden, I sat on the porch swing Dylan and I had installed during our first year in the house. I thought about the woman I'd been when we bought this place. Younger, softer, full of dreams about the family we'd raise here. Life had taken a different path. The family I protected wasn't the one I'd imagined, but it was no less valuable. Max wasn't my child, but I'd fought for him as fiercely as any mother would. My marriage to Michael wasn't a replacement for what I'd lost with Dylan, but a new chapter with its own joy. My parents had aged considerably in the past decade. My father, now dealing with early Parkinson's, had found redemption in his relationship with Max, teaching him woodworking and patience. My mother had softened her enabling tendencies, though old habits occasionally resurfaced. The Dylan Mitchell Legal Fellowship had expanded to support 10 students annually. One of our first recipients was now a partner at Dylan's old firm. Each year at the fundraising gala, I displayed the Boston skyline watercolor that had brought us together. I still kept Dylan's journal in my bedside drawer, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as evidence of how thoroughly he'd loved me, enough to protect me even after he was gone. Jules and I would never be close again. Some wounds don't heal completely. But we'd found a way to coexist peacefully around the bright center of Max's life. She no longer tried to manipulate or deceive. I no longer needed to defend against her schemes. As darkness fell, I went inside and opened the wooden box where I kept Dylan's ring. The gold still gleamed in the lamplight. Beside it lay Michael's first anniversary gift to me, a delicate bracelet engraved with a single line, "Love writes memories." Dylan had been right about that, but he'd been wrong about one thing. Betrayal doesn't just write contingency plans. Sometimes it writes new beginnings, too. I closed the box and placed it back on the shelf. Tomorrow would be another day of client meetings, foundation work, and regular life. The drama that had once consumed me had faded to a quiet background note. She came for my grief and found my strength instead. She came for my home and awakened my resolve. She came to rewrite my story and discovered I held the pen. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't punishment or revenge. It was simply this: I survived. I thrived. And I kept my promise to the man who had loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. That was justice enough.